Well, I can barely see you from here, but I know you can see me because I'm wearing a tent. And it was said that the dean is hiding somewhere in the audience, but he may be hiding in our coats. So congratulations. You've made it to the finish line, and it's time to celebrate. Last year I finished my PhD, and I was completely euphoric, and I did what any person would do who's driven half mad by the APA style manual and the 118th revision of my 400-page dissertation and a grueling 3-hour defense on what happened to be the hottest day of the whole year, because I needed to be sweating more than I already was for that day. I ran around the streets screaming and threw myself a huge party, and then I danced around in a muumuu to Journey and Roxy music, and ceremoniously took the mounds of articles and papers and notes to the recycling box with a big thump. It was all over. And I dreamed of spending the rest of the summer reading smutty novels, watching back-to-back episodes of Downton Abbey, and sipping mojitos on the patio. But alas, it was not to be. You will see that as graduates, the journey leads to another as soon as it ends, and that one has only just begun. And we never quite know what the path ahead will look like, and that's okay. Leadership is about jumping in blindfolded and with both feet, knowing that you don't have all the answers. And it's about feeling your way around in the dark when the path ahead is not so well lit. And sometimes it's about making it up as you go along, about being mapless. But we can assure ourselves that there will be some signposts along the way if we bring along a few key items. So I'll tell you what I've tried to bring along on my own journey, and how that journey first started. So in 1996, the Taliban captured Kabul and became the government of Afghanistan. And that year, another momentous, explosive thing happened. I hit puberty. I was a 9th grader, full of hormones and teenage angst and driving my parents crazy. And like many adolescents, I liked to challenge authority. And I also had an interest in justice and rights, so my wise mother helped channel my authority challenging to a more worthy foe than herself when she cut out a newspaper article one day about the Taliban's treatment of women in Afghanistan. And she left it in my room, and I came home from school and read it. And that article described the Taliban and the edicts that they'd imposed on women and girls, closing girls' schools, kicking women out of their jobs, banning women from even leaving their homes, imprisoning an entire nation's women and girls. Now, I was always temperamental, but nothing has or ever will make me as angry as I felt when I first heard this, stripped of their rights for the crime of being born a female. Back in 1996, I had the worldliness of your average 14-year-old, so that is not very much at all. I couldn't find Afghanistan on a map, and I didn't know anything about human rights law, and I certainly had no experience as a leader. But I did have one important asset, and that was that I was super, super pissed off. And anger is an often overlooked part of passion, and it gets a bad rap, but at the end of the day, it's what drives a lot of effective action. So that's one signpost that I think you need to light the road ahead is anger. We live in a society that's very often about feeling soft and fuzzy inside, and sometimes we need a good slap of rage to elicit serious responses to serious problems. When that anger needs to get out, we should let it out and find a good channel for it. My own anger management issues have once been made very public. A few years ago, I did an interview with the newspaper 24 Hours, and I talked about my rage over the Taliban's treatment of women. And I had the unique experience of seeing my own huge, round, angry face on the cover of the paper under the headline, "I just exploded with rage," on the sides of buses and benches and newspaper stands all over the city of Vancouver for a few days. So all of Vancouver knew that I was really mad. But the only thing that made me angrier than the Taliban's atrocious treatment of women was that they were getting away with it. The world had mostly turned its back on the women and girls of Afghanistan. And one reason is that we sometimes allow excuses of the inviolability of culture to trump rights, and that was something that I quickly learned. The first thing I ever did as an activist was to write up a petition demanding that the UN and the Canadian government condemn the Taliban's treatment of women. And when I brought my petition to school, one of my teachers wouldn't sign it. He said, "That's their culture, and it's none of our business how they choose to treat their women." And I couldn't believe my ears. But I started to get used to hearing it, because it's a common reaction to injustices that happen to people far away from us. And in fact, the farther they are from us, the more you'll find it. And Afghanistan is exactly on the other side of the world from us here in BC. And so it happens that a lot of people have told me to mind my own business. But this excuse for not responding only works if you see yourself as inherently different from the victims of such abuses. But we're not different, we're the same, and it's perhaps an inconvenient truth. And to remember this point demands that you keep your ethical intelligence razor sharp. So that's the next lantern that you need to have on hand to light your way, is ethical intelligence. And I think it's as important as the other intelligence, logic, emotional, and so on. And there's an increasingly apparent relationship between science and morality as we find more and more evidence that we're born as ethical beings with the innate ability to distinguish between right and wrong. And as we grow up and we're socialized, that ability is refined as it's shaped by our parents, our teachers, our mentors, and other forces. But it's also challenged as we try to fit into society and develop a fear of being the odd one out, of voicing a viewpoint that goes against the grain or that might offend somebody. So sometimes we muffle our ethical intelligence. And once enough people are doing that, the result is complacence and even complicity in some of the wrongs being done in the world. And part of having ethical intelligence is being willing to be offensive if you have to, and to never, ever mind your own business. As humans, we're all born with the capacity for empathy when we're exposed to suffering or pain in others. But empathy is not just emotional, it's also biological. It's something that's genetically coded within us. What happens if you see somebody get a paper cut? You wince, right? And that's a biological reaction. So we relate to the pain of others in even a physiological way, and we're social beings. So we end up taking part in the joy experienced by others, and we also end up taking part in the pain experienced by others. And so it's in our interest to avoid pain in others and to promote joy in others. And we have molecules in our chemical makeup, like oxytocin, which is what neurologists say is responsible for triggering our feelings of compassion, of generosity, of charity, of affection. And the oxytocin in your body is why you might smile when you see a baby. It's why parents try to protect and love their children, and it's what triggers feelings of empathy. So it's part of what makes us moral beings, literally. So morality is not something that we have created in our society, but rather it comes from our biology. But the society that we create is what makes us more or less moral than how we start out. So we can instinctually imagine the feelings of pain inflicted on another person, inflicted on ourselves. But as we go out into the world and make choices about how to respond to the pain of others, we have different ways of dealing with it. We have a menu of options before us. When we hear stories of human suffering, whether close to home or far away, whether in your family, your neighborhood, your community, or further afield. When we see something that's hard to witness, there's an automatic alarm bell that's ringing inside of us, and it can be loud and invasive, and sometimes we want to smother it to protect ourselves from taking in all the suffering, all the problems, all the pain of others. So that's one option, to just block it out. Or we can dig around for ways of justifying why we're not obliged to respond. Things like culture, like distance, like difference. And then there is anger. And as I said, anger has its purpose too. It can serve as very good fuel if you can channel it to the next option, which is to respond to that gut feeling you first have of empathy with action, even if you're the only one who's doing so. Because the deviants of society are the ones who bring about the kinds of shifts that we need to move our civilization forward. Many of you have probably heard of Malala Yousafzai. Malala is a 15-year-old who's been fighting to keep girls' schools open in her home of the Swat Valley in Pakistan, which fell under Taliban control a few years ago, when hundreds of girls' schools were shut down, usually by burning them to the ground. On October 9th of last year, armed militants boarded Malala's school bus and shot her in the head in front of her terrified classmates. And the very next day was the first ever International Day of the Girl Child, and Malala lay in a hospital bed fighting for her life. And the Taliban very swiftly laid claim to the attack, saying quite specifically that their reason for trying to kill Malala was that they thought girls' education is, quote, obscene. But Malala survived, and the Taliban unintentionally propelled her to international fame. She's now nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. Her message just got an infinitely larger audience at the same time that the Taliban made themselves look like even greater buffoons than usual. Malala is a positive deviant, and positive deviants are those rare individuals who go against the grain, sometimes in a time or a place where you can pay the ultimate price for doing so. Positive deviants are motivated by nothing else but the knowledge that their deviation is right and just, if terribly burdensome. And they're the stars that we must hold up highest in the sky, because they're the ones who change history. It was once part of our culture for women not to vote, and for women not to work outside the home, for women not to pursue education. And though I can't see too well, I'm pretty sure that I see lots of women graduating today. So we can thank the deviants for that. They're the ones who went first, and the ones who change history, the trailblazers who clear the way for others to come after them. So pay attention to the positive deviants and try a little deviation yourself when it's merited. Keep your ethical intelligence well polished and well tuned. And remember my other advice to you, because I might be the only speaker at a convocation to ever advise graduates to be angry, offensive, and devious. At my organization, at Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan, we train 1,000 teachers every year. And whenever I attend a teacher graduation ceremony, I always tell the teachers, you carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. You're responsible for grooming citizens to be, for preparing your charges to be responsible members of society, contributing community members, ethical and compassionate human beings, and future leaders and decision makers. Your burden is a heavy one, but a sacred one. And so I say the same to you. Seek to share your knowledge and skills with those around you, and be a leader from whom others can learn. Take your burden and make it consequential. Thank you very much.